What's up, guys? Shanahan here with a small walkthrough of my record with Disco Fries. It's called Feel Again. It's out on Liftoff, their own record label. We went with more of a just a pure vibe to this record. It's nothing big room. It's nothing that's typically really housey. It's just an entire vibe that had a progressive feel that me and the boys were going for this time, and I think it really turned out good. It has a intro edge that is quite unique in my opinion and comes into more of a chorus progressive feel throughout the record arrangement wise. So it kind of just has this pure vibe to it that really stood out to us. I hope you guys like it. So we're going to go through a few things. You guys can see in the session here, this is not overcomplicated. We do have a final session that the Disco Fries took over and did some tweaks. You guys can hear in the final record there's a few more things going on that we incorporated, but this is kind of the framework of how the record came together with both of us working together. It was quite easy. The workflow, we're both in the same DAW along with Ableton, which I work in also. So our workflow is quite easy and flawless. So let's go over a few things, guys. I'm going to play out the intro and then go over a few of the stems and see what you guys think. All right, so let's talk about the first, we could definitely call it the intro or verse one if you want to go about it that way. This guitar that I recorded in was based off of a sample, I want to say, that I heard in Arcade from Output. I'm a big user. You guys can see here, Arcade I used for some ARPs. I used Arcade for the vocals. Some of you guys that have seen my videos in the past, you know I'm a firm believer in less is more, specifically in a dance record like this. Don't overcomplicate things. That's why I don't have 101 stems. Again, we had a few more going on when the Disco Fries took over. There's some more stuff incorporated, but we didn't overcomplicate the record. The idea was there. It was all about vibe, mix down, and the overall master. So one of the things I really love about that I did here was this guitar. Again, something you probably wouldn't recognize in my records or maybe even the Disco Fries, something that we just did different. I just played that in on guitar, the electric. Again, it was influenced and inspired by a Arcade Output sample. I can't remember the exact kit. I'll try to find that, but it sounds basically really, really similar. And for me, when I'm trying to create a record based on maybe a sample I've heard, I love recreating it, reverse engineering it, and flipping it to something I like and putting my own twist on it. Other thing I recorded in, same idea I heard from a sample, was this guitar slide. That gave a huge vibe. The guitar slide and the main bass guitar, it just, once I was creating that, I immediately showed Nick from Disco Fries, and I was like, this is just a vibe. It just feels right. It feels different. And he agreed, and we kind of went with it. And then it kind of progressed into more of a chorus feel with the change of the bass, change of the chords, etc., to kind of get that vibe that we were going for. I started introducing some more atmosphere stuff here. And not overcomplicating the processing. Again, the sound was right, the sample that I was using and the actual sound itself. I didn't have to overcomplicate processing. Simple EQ on that stuff, simple EQ on the guitars. You guys can just see, the simple sidechain, of course, that I'm using throughout. But let's move to the kind of the fuller part of the record. After this kind of guitar bass starts, you guys can see I introduce an entire different bass line that we designed through Serum. All right, let's talk about this part. Besides drop B or drop 2, this is definitely probably my favorite part of the record, of that swing of emotion, the swing of the change of the instruments, not a change of vocals, but a change of the vibe while it continues progressing. I thought it was really cool. When I handed over the session to the guys, we really wanted to have them portray more smoother transitions, bigger build-ups. So this area, they put quite a bit of work into making that flow together, which you guys can obviously hear in the finished record. And drop B, drop 2, they put a lot into that, of making it kind of have a bit more tension than I have in this the DAW that I'm looking at right now, the session. They put a bit more into that, along with other instrumental parts. But you guys can get a feel of what we did here. The drop B, which is our chorus bass, you could call it, is completely different, and a completely different sound design. And I did some simple pitch bending stuff in here with the MIDI, with the pitch bend inside Serum. Very kind of just kind of gives a flow and more of an authentic feel to the bass. Very simple patch, but it's distorted. It's really driven because I wanted to tie in with an actual bass guitar sound. So I went with Focus One from Sick Individuals. I love this plugin. You really can drive a sound and kind of give it a guitar edge. You can kind of hear it's bringing out almost a touch of reverb. I'm not a huge long decays on bass. That's not really something that's going to work out for you mix wise, but I like doing short plate and stuff like that to kind of give a wider room feel to a certain bass like this. Aside from that, just simple EQ and filtering for this to kind of go into the breakdown, etc. So that's your 2 bass lines. And then I introduced some chords, simple strings with a phaser type processing to it, because that's kind of the pride of vibe I wanted to this, the inspiration to be. And phasing, having a phaser or a flanger slightly wet on elements like strings and chords can really bring a good feel to it. And I'm a huge user of mid-side EQ. I think for your average producer, it's just not used enough, or maybe not understood. But what I'm doing is pushing out mid elements, which is the warmest part of the strings, and I'm pushing them out to the side. Long story short, mix-wise, it's so your bass really fits in that mid area, the mid lows, and the chords and the strings simply don't get in the way. Moving down to our percussion sets, guys, I was going for more of a retro wave, I guess, is a genre that I was kind of come to mind with the style drums. Very kind of 80s, 90s type sound. And I don't overcomplicate things. I think it's so important to have the right sample selection. Of course, that's it. You know, like if you really just sit there for hours on samples and kind of waste time going through stuff, it can be really mentally kind of bring you down a bit. But when I find the right sample that I know is the right vibe for the record, I run with it and I work with it, and it usually works out. All right, let's move over to how simple the breakdown is. Again, the end finished product has a bit more in it. The Disco Fries added in their touch, but let's hear it. So the vibe here is that ARP coming from Arcade again, but I automated in this bass line slowly, high cut to low to bring in the low frequencies. Again, just kind of transition-wise, arrangement-wise, lets the record ride out without it getting boring. And again, our vocals, the sample here from Arcade that I put together is just riding out the entire song. This is basically one vocal hook, which you guys could probably see I did on my Hold On To Me record with Enhance. I did a similar idea of like putting together small phases and small vocals and forming an actual record around that. I don't like to overcomplicate things if you don't have to. So then this all automates up. And this entire space here is where I had Nick and Danny put a lot of kind of effort into, all right, we have the fundamentals of it, but I know when I talked with Nick, we were like, we got to take this just 5-10% a bit bigger, because this is, you know, obviously you're ending, you know, chorus 2, drop 2, whatever you guys want to call it. So we did a lot of automation here, but you can hear the kind of fundamentals of what I did in this beginning stage. So you guys can see, obviously drop 2 has a different vibe. So a couple things we did, we changed the chords. I love doing that if I can. To a record, drop 1 and 2, I always love to be slightly different. You know, obvious reasons, you don't want your listener to get bored. It creates more tension, it creates more emotion. So I flipped chord progression 1 and 3. So you guys can see over here on drop 1. What I did was take this chord and this chord set, and I literally flipped them. So I reversed those, inverted them to now 3 is over on 1, and now 1 is over on 3. Very simple but effective way to create a different emotion to a drop, a chorus section, whatever it may be. And of course, the bass line followed the same idea as the chords. The ARP stayed the same. The riff atmosphere I talked about the same. That guitar slide is there. So I'm still incorporating stuff from drop 1, just we're creating a different vibe from the switching of the chords. Quite simple. In the finished record, we do not have this outro idea I had. We, you know, me and the Disc Fries kind of talked it over and said we don't really necessarily need that, but just to hear what we had in mind so you guys can hear this from a different perspective. So initially I had that idea. I was kind of thinking about DJ outro if someone was playing this live to kind of have that, but it's we definitely have the extended mix out too, but we did it a little differently with more of drum-based outro and kind of simple. The last thing I can show is another sound I put together was this analog feel that kind of goes a long way in the drop. Maybe you're not hearing it right away, but if I solo it, it kind of adds a lot of taste to this intro drop. It just gives that edge, and for me, guys, is I've been producing so long at this point that I like finding little bits of ear candy that go a long way in a record. Something that's even a 2% difference can make night and day to any record. The end result, guys, before we sign off, the master we did with the Disco Fries, but I can show what I basically had before I sent it over to them. I went through Ozone 8 to kind of get that nice master finalized sound, and we'll go to drop 2 so you can kind of hear everything full. Aside from simple limiting and dynamics, I usually use multi-band compression on my master, but to not go over that, I think the main thing that really is important in my master version was I like using exciters or saturators in a master, specifically on mid frequencies and high frequencies. If it's on a record that's kind of like this with guitar driven, distorted kind of elements, I love hiking mid-high frequencies to give an extra crunch. And guys, it can be the most subtle difference. You guys can see the amount here I'm doing is very, very minimal, but it goes a long way to giving a mix down and certain elements in the record that kind of distorted edge that you're going for. Simple EQing to cut out a few frequencies. Limiting, I generally will use the maximizer here from Ozone. AOM limiter is one of my go-tos. But again, the final result was done with the Disco Fries, which you guys can hear now. And just finally, the vocal down at the bottom, you guys can hear right here. I love putting through CLA. My reverb choice, as a lot of you guys have seen, is Valhalla. I always use Valhalla majority of the time for any of my reverb go-to. It's just really just has the right sound. And I copied those settings throughout. You guys can see all of the vocals just running throughout the entire record, so don't have to go over that again, but stuck with CLA. Simple low cut to get rid of the frequencies. And on the drops, last but not least, I ended up side chaining the vocals on the drops just so that they would kind of sit in the mix a bit more, let the guitar kind of come forward and all those other elements. And mix-wise, once we put them all together, it worked out perfectly. So that's a wrap, guys. That is a small walkthrough of my record Feel Again with Disco Fries. It's out, Liftoff Recordings. Make sure you go listen. Subscribe to our channels, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Reach out with any questions. Take care.